The city lay under a thick silver fog, curling around the narrow streets like a restless spirit. Lanterns flickered along the walls of stone towers, casting trembling shadows that danced like silent watchers. In this city, power was whispered, not spoken aloud. Everyone knew the name of the Jefe, the man whose influence stretched through every alley, every market, every hall of the ruling council. But even the bravest men stayed away from the heart of his fortress at dawn, for fear of the shadows that seemed to follow him. At the top of the tallest tower, the Jefe stood alone, his cloak heavy with the weight of authority and expectation. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, watching as the first pale rays of sunlight tried to pierce the mist. He was a man who had faced enemies of flesh and of spirit, yet tonight, something felt different, a disturbance he could not name. The sound came first, a soft, almost inaudible murmur, carried by the wind. It was the kind of whisper that makes a person shiver even when no danger is visible. Then he saw her. She was at the foot of the tower, shrouded in a cloak that seemed to swallow the dim light. Her hair, dark and wet from the night, clung to her shoulders. But it was not her appearance that made the Jefe's pulse quicken. It was the mark. A strange, swirling emblem rested upon her forearm, glowing faintly in the dawn. He had never seen anything like it, yet instinctively he knew it was dangerous. "Who brought you here?" he asked, his voice low but sharp, echoing against the stone walls. The woman looked up. Her eyes were dark pools of fear and something else, something unspoken that tugged at him, a pull that was neither threat nor plea, but a connection he could not deny. "They sent me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I had no choice. Please, don't let them touch me." The Jefe felt a stir of something long buried inside him. Usually he did not care for pleas, for cries of the desperate or the lost. But something about her, fragile yet unbroken, made him hesitate. He stepped down from the tower with deliberate calm, moving closer, though the shadows around him seemed to shift, warning the city's denizens of the danger in his presence. He stopped a few paces away, studying her, trying to read the story behind those glowing marks. "What is this mark?" he asked, pointing to her arm. "Who did this to you?" She flinched, her eyes widening. I do not know. It appeared in the night. They said it would bring death to anyone who touched me. I cannot go back. Not to them. Not to anyone. Please, I beg you. I only want safety." The Jefe's hand brushed against the hilt of the dagger at his side, not out of threat but instinct. His life was spent defending against hidden forces, and he could sense when something beyond normal danger was present. And yet, despite the warning in his chest, he found himself saying, "You will stay here. With me, no one touches you." Her eyes shone with gratitude, but also with fear. "I do not deserve kindness," she said softly. "I only bring danger to those near me." "I am not afraid of danger," he replied almost automatically. Yet even as he spoke, a part of him wondered if he had spoken too soon. They moved to the inner halls of the fortress, where shadows clung to the stone walls like memories of forgotten betrayals. The Jefe watched her closely as she walked, noticing how her steps were careful, almost afraid of disturbing the air around her. Even in her silence, she carried a presence that made the men who served him uneasy. No one dared speak, and even the guards felt the tension, though none understood why. For hours they did not speak. The woman sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around her cloak, eyes flicking to every corner as if expecting something terrible to emerge from the walls. The Jefe, meanwhile, sat across from her, studying her in silence. He did not ask the usual questions, where she came from, what her name was, who would claim her. There was time for that later. For now he watched, understanding that some things were not meant to be forced into words immediately. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will not stop," she said. "Not until I am gone, or until something else takes me instead." The Jefe leaned forward, his sharp gaze meeting hers. "Then I will be that something else. No one touches you." Her lips parted in surprise, and for a moment something like hope flickered in her eyes. She said nothing, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. As night faded into a gray dawn, the wind outside stirred the fog around the fortress, carrying distant sounds of the city waking. But inside there was a silence that was heavier than any storm. The Jefe stood and walked to the window, staring at the city below. 100 men below, and yet none dared approach. Not when he was watching. Not when the woman with the glowing mark was here. She rose and approached the window, standing beside him. Her presence was strange, neither fully human nor fully apart from it. The glow on her arm pulsed faintly as if alive, a heartbeat echoing through the room. "I am a burden," she whispered. "You should not have let me in." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, tracing the lines of her face in his mind. "Perhaps," he said finally, "but some burdens are worth carrying." Her eyes met his, and in that glance 1,000 unspoken fears and desires collided. She was a puzzle he could not yet solve, a storm he could not yet tame, and yet he found himself drawn to her, compelled by forces he could neither name nor deny. Hours passed like moments, and the dawn grew pale and weak. Outside, the city began to stir with life again, but inside the fortress, time seemed suspended. Neither of them moved, bound by the unspoken knowledge that their meeting was only the beginning of something far larger than either could anticipate. Then, without warning, the mark on her arm flared brightly, illuminating the room with a soft, almost painful light. The Jefe flinched, his instincts screaming at him that this was more than a mere charm or curse. It was a warning, a call to power beyond his comprehension. The woman gasped. I cannot control it," she said, her voice trembling. "If they touch me, if I am taken, it will not only be my life. Everyone near me." The Jefe stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "I will not let them touch you," he said, and in his tone was the promise of both protection and possession, not of ownership, but of something deeper, something like destiny. For the first time since her arrival, she allowed herself a flicker of trust, but even as she leaned slightly toward him, a shadow passed over the fortress walls. From the streets below, figures moved, unseen yet present, drawn by the rumor of the woman with the glowing mark. The Jefe's jaw tightened. He could feel the tension in the air, the electricity of anticipation, the first stirrings of chaos that would soon descend upon them. His mind raced, weighing strategy, power, and instinct, and through it all he could not ignore the pull of the woman beside him. She was not just a threat, not just a burden, she was a force he could not resist. And then she whispered something that made him freeze in place, the words barely audible over the wind that rattled the windows. "Protect me. But beware. The dawn brings more than light. It brings the reckoning." The Jefe's heart, which had long been armored against emotion, skipped. He understood the gravity of her words. He understood that his life, his power, his fortress, and even the men who served him were now tied to this mysterious woman. And he also understood something else, something dangerous and intoxicating. He wanted her near, not just safe but close in a way that defied reason or fear. Outside, the city's awakening sounds grew louder. But inside, the fortress held its breath, waiting for the moment when the first ripple of destiny would fall, and when the whispers of power and desire would begin to shape the fates of all within. The Jefe did not speak again. He only watched her, and she watched him, and in that silence both understood that the night was far from over, that danger and longing were now intertwined, and that the dawn would reveal challenges neither of them could face alone. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of fear, ambition, and shadow, the Jefe felt the stirrings of something he had not felt in years. Hope. Cliffhanger. As the first weak rays of sunlight broke through the fog, the mark on her arm flared once more, pulsing with a strange rhythm. She looked at the Jefe, her eyes wide with fear and awe, and whispered, "If they find me, everything will burn. You must choose. Protect me or lose everything." The Jefe's hand tightened around the edge of the window, his mind racing as outside the fortress the first footsteps of fate approached. The city's fog had barely lifted when the first rumors began to stir. Whispers in the market, hushed conversations in alleyways, all spoke of the woman with the glowing mark and the Jefe who had dared to protect her. Even the most hardened soldiers of the city felt unease prick at the edges of their courage. There was something unnatural about her, something ancient, and the mark on her arm pulsed like a heartbeat against the quiet dawn. Inside the fortress, the Jefe moved through the halls with a careful step. His guards followed, but none spoke. None dared. His mind was occupied entirely with her. The woman, now sitting in the largest chamber of the fortress, had removed her cloak, revealing the swirling emblem that wrapped around her forearm like living ink. It glowed faintly, breathing in rhythm with her own pulse. "I can feel them," she said softly, not looking at him. "The ones who sent me, they are close." They will not stop until the mark is claimed. The Jefe moved to stand beside her, his presence heavy with authority, yet tempered with a rare gentleness. Then they will find nothing but my fortress and my blade. No one touches you. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and for a moment the fear in them softened, replaced by something fragile, something like trust. I have seen men die for less, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Why would you care for me? He studied her carefully, his jaw tight. I do not care for you, he said finally, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. I care about what the mark will bring, and if the mark is threatened, so are you. Her gaze lingered on his face, searching for some truth, some hidden meaning behind his words. She saw a man who had carried power like armor for decades, a man who had feared nothing and no one, yet here he was, trembling ever so slightly at the thought of losing her. A sudden noise in the courtyard drew their attention. Shadows moved, long and twisted as though reaching for the fortress walls. The Jefe's eyes narrowed. He gestured for the woman to stay, then stepped toward the balcony. The guards followed, weapons ready. They are testing us, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. They want to see if I will falter. She rose behind him, curiosity and fear warring in her expression. If they come, she whispered, they will not stop. The mark. It carries a power they cannot control. The Jefe glanced at her, noting how the light from the mark reflected in her eyes, giving them an otherworldly glow. Then they will fail, he replied, though his voice carried the weight of caution. For hours they watched the courtyard in tense silence. The fog swirled, hiding the city streets, and the distant sound of footsteps could be heard, too many yet indistinct. Then suddenly, the mark on her arm pulsed brighter, flaring with a light that was almost painful to look at. The woman gasped, stepping back. It's happening, she whispered. The moment they sense the connection, the moment they know someone protects me, it will awaken. The Jefe's hand went to her shoulder, steadying her. Then we face it together, he said, though inside a strange uncertainty tugged at him. He had faced many enemies, but none like this. This was not just power, it was fate, a force ancient and inscrutable. And yet he felt a strange thrill in that danger, for it drew him closer to her, binding him in ways he did not yet understand. As the morning light began to break, revealing faint outlines of the city beyond the mist, the first of the intruders appeared, figures cloaked in black, moving silently, their intent clear in every measured step. The guards tensed, weapons raised, but the Jefe stepped forward, placing himself in the line of sight. They touch her, he said, voice cold, and they die, every last one of them. The intruders paused, sensing the authority and power radiating from him, but the woman stepped forward, the mark on her arm flaring brighter with each step as though answering some unseen call. Wait, she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. Let me. The Jefe turned, startled by her boldness. You do not. I can help, she interrupted, her gaze locking on the approaching shadows. The mark. It responds to my will. I can defend us, he hesitated, realizing she was not merely a passive victim. There was strength in her, hidden beneath the fear and mystery, and yet the risks were enormous. If the mark overwhelmed her, it could destroy everything, including the fortress and everyone within. Then we do it together, he said finally, stepping beside her. The intruders advanced, but as they drew closer, a strange energy began to emanate from her arm. It was not fire, not light, but something in between, a living shadow that twisted and coiled around the approaching figures. The Jefe watched, awe mixing with fear, as they were halted in their tracks, unable to move forward. She turned to him, eyes wide. It listens to me, she whispered, but I do not fully control it. I need you to anchor me. He reached for her hand, feeling the pulse of power beneath her skin. Then I am your anchor, he said, his voice steady, resolute. And I will not let go. For a moment their hands touched, and the energy from the mark surged, flaring across the courtyard in waves. The intruders faltered, some retreating, others frozen in fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the energy receded, leaving only the faint glow on her arm. The woman stumbled slightly, drained by the exertion. The Jefe caught her, supporting her weight as she leaned against him. For a long moment they stood like that, surrounded by silence, both catching their breath. You are stronger than you realize, he said quietly, looking into her eyes, and braver than any man I have known. She shook her head slightly, a faint smile on her lips. I have no choice, she admitted. This is my burden, and perhaps my destiny. The Jefe did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, feeling a strange pull that went beyond duty or strategy. There was a connection here, something older than fear, older than power. He did not yet understand it, but he knew it would bind him to her in ways he could not resist. Hours passed, the fog lifting slowly to reveal a city that seemed both familiar and strange in the light of day. The intruders had disappeared, leaving only traces of their intent. The fortress was safe for now, but the Jefe knew this was only the beginning. You will not be safe here, she said softly, her voice carrying a note of warning. They will return. And when they do, it will not be a simple attack, the mark. It will call them, and I cannot stop it entirely. He placed a hand on her arm, feeling the faint pulse of energy beneath the skin. Then we prepare. We face them together. No one harms you. Not while I breathe. Her gaze softened, and she allowed herself a moment of trust. I do not know how to thank you, she said. Not for the fortress, not for the protection, but for this. He tilted his head, unsure what she meant, and she met his eyes. Her look filled with unspoken meaning, fear, gratitude, and something else. Something neither of them had yet named. Outside, the city continued to stir. Market vendors called out. Children ran along the cobblestone streets, unaware of the ancient power that had awakened within the fortress walls. But inside, the Jefe and the woman with the mark knew that their lives had changed forever. A bond had formed, delicate yet unbreakable, fragile yet powerful. And in that bond lay both salvation and danger, promise and peril. For the first time in years, the Jefe felt a stirring of something he had not felt since long ago. Hope. And perhaps longing. As night began to fall again, a shadow moved along the walls of the city, watching, waiting. The intruders had not abandoned their purpose. The mark would call them again, stronger, hungrier, and when they returned, neither the Jefe nor the woman would be able to deny what was coming. The woman looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. If they come again, I fear even you may not be enough. He tightened his grip on her hand, the firelight from the hearth casting their shadows across the wall. Then I will become enough, he said, though deep inside, he knew that this night was only the first step in a long journey through shadows, power and the strange unspoken bond that now tied them together. Cliffhanger. Outside the fortress, beyond the safety of its walls, a figure emerged from the mist, a watcher cloaked in black, its eyes glowing faintly red. It moved silently, a predator and a messenger both carrying a warning that would change everything. The mark calls, and the reckoning has begun. The fortress stood silent under the cloak of night, its stone walls cold and unyielding. Within, the Jefe paced like a caged storm, his mind consumed by the shadow of the approaching threat. He had protected many, fought countless battles, and outwitted enemies more cunning than most men could imagine. Yet the woman with the mark had changed everything. She was no ordinary prey, no simple problem to be solved. She carried a power older than the city itself, a force that could turn allies into enemies and bend fate in ways even he could not predict. The woman sat by the hearth, her hands folded, the faint glow of the mark illuminating the delicate lines of her face. She had grown quieter since the last encounter, as if the weight of the energy she carried pressed upon her very soul. She looked up as he entered the room, her eyes shadowed with worry. They will come again, she said softly. I can feel it. The mark senses their approach. It calls them, and I cannot stop it. The Jefe stood near her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. Then we prepare, he said, though his voice betrayed the tension he felt. We cannot hide. We cannot wait for them to strike. We must face whatever comes together. Her gaze lingered on him, a mixture of fear and something else. Trust, perhaps, or something deeper that neither dared name. I do not know if I can control it, she admitted. The mark. It reacts to me, but I am not strong enough yet. If I fail, you will not fail, he interrupted, firm. I will not let you. There was a silence heavy with unspoken words. He had protected many, but never like this. The danger was not merely physical. It was woven into the very air around them, into the rhythm of their hearts and the pulse of the city outside. And yet amid the fear, A strange bond had formed between them, fragile but unbreakable, like a thin thread spun from shadow and fire. Hours passed, and the distant sounds of the city faded into an uneasy quiet. Then, from the upper balcony, a scout reported movement in the streets below. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and figures cloaked in black moved with the precision of hunters. The Jefe tightened his grip on the hilt of his dagger. He had faced assassins before, but these were different. They were drawn by something ancient, something beyond mortal comprehension. "They are not ordinary men," he said, his eyes narrowing. "They are bound to the mark, and they will not stop until it is claimed." The woman stood beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "Then we face them," she whispered. Together. As they descended to the courtyard, the air grew thick with tension. The fog had returned, curling around the stone walls like a living thing, hiding the movements of the unseen. The Jefe felt the familiar thrill of danger, but it was tempered by something new, a strange protective instinct for the woman beside him. He was not merely defending the fortress, he was defending her, and in doing so he was discovering a part of himself he had long buried. The intruders appeared suddenly, emerging from the mist, like shadows come to life. They moved silently, their steps measured, their intent clear. The Jefe stepped forward, placing himself between them and the woman. The glow of her mark pulsed brighter, reacting to the threat, and a strange, almost musical hum filled the air. "Stay behind me," he said, though he did not attempt to shield her completely. He had learned long ago that to underestimate power, even from those he protected, was to court disaster. The intruders hesitated, sensing the combined force of the Jefe's authority and the woman's mark. The air between them crackled, charged with a tension that was almost unbearable. Then with a sudden surge, the mark flared, sending waves of light and shadow across the courtyard. The intruders froze, caught in the energy that rippled outward like invisible chains. The woman gasped, her body trembling as she struggled to control the surge. I cannot hold it much longer," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. The Jefe stepped closer, placing both hands on her shoulders, anchoring her. "Breathe," he said, voice steady. "I am here. Focus on me. You are not alone." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The pulsing light of the mark filled the courtyard, painting the walls with swirling patterns of shadow and silver. The intruders could not move, could not speak, as though the energy itself had frozen them in place. And then slowly the woman found her center. She drew a deep breath, and the mark responded to her will, calming, retreating to a soft glow. The Jefe released her, and she sank to the ground, exhausted, but alive. His gaze did not waver. "You are stronger than you believe," he said, helping her to her feet. "And braver than anyone I have known." She shook her head, faintly smiling despite the fear in her eyes. "I do not know if I am brave," she admitted. "I only know that I cannot run anymore." They returned to the fortress, the fog closing around them once more. Inside, the quiet was heavy, filled with unspoken words and lingering tension. The woman sat by the fire, her gaze distant. The Jefe, though exhausted, could not bring himself to sit. He paced the room, mind racing with strategy, concern, and something else. He realized then that the danger was not just the intruders. The real threat was the bond that had formed between them. It was unspoken, fragile, yet powerful. A tether neither could ignore. And the mark was not merely a curse or a weapon. It was a test, a force that would challenge both their strength and their hearts. "I have lived my life in shadow," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I have trusted no one. Yet now," his voice faltered and he shook his head, trying to dispel the unfamiliar warmth in his chest. The woman looked up, sensing the change. "Now what?" she asked softly. "Now," he replied, turning to face her. "We must prepare. They will return, stronger, smarter, more determined. And when they do, we must stand together." Her eyes met his, and in that moment a silent understanding passed between them. She was no longer merely someone to protect. She was part of the fight, part of his life, and perhaps, against all reason, part of his heart. The night deepened, and the fortress seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the city slept uneasily, unaware of the ancient powers stirring beyond the fog. Inside, the Jefe and the woman with the mark shared a fragile calm, knowing that it would not last. Suddenly, a noise at the outer gates broke the silence, a soft, deliberate tapping almost like the beat of a drum. Both turned, alert. The HFY drew his dagger, the familiar weight grounding him. The woman's mark glowed faintly, sensing the approach of something more than mortal. "Who goes there?" he called, his voice echoing through the courtyard. No answer came, only the slow, deliberate tapping. And then from the mist a figure emerged, tall and cloaked in black. Its eyes glowed faintly red, reflecting the light of the woman's mark. It stopped a few paces from the gates, silent, motionless as though measuring them. The woman's breath caught. It knows me," she whispered. The HFY stepped forward, placing himself between her and the figure. "Then it will have to answer to me," he said, though his voice carried the weight of the uncertainty he felt. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something ancient, something that had waited for her, for the mark, for him. The figure tilted its head, and a voice emerged, low and almost musical, echoing in the courtyard. "The mark calls, and the reckoning approaches. Choose wisely or all will be lost." The words hung in the air, chilling and heavy. The HFY felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. Heavier than any siege, sharper than any blade. The woman stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. "Together," she whispered. He nodded, though inside a storm raged. He did not yet understand the full power of the mark, nor the consequences of their bond. But he knew this. He would face whatever came, and he would face it with her by his side. The figure retreated slowly into the mist, leaving only the echo of its warning. The fortress held its breath, and the city outside seemed to shrink in fear, sensing the tension that had settled over its heart. The HFY turned to the woman, his voice quiet but firm. "Tomorrow we strike first. We do not wait for them, and you will learn to control the mark. We cannot afford hesitation." She nodded, determination shining through her fear. "I will try," she said. "For you, for us, for the city." The night passed slowly, filled with quiet preparation and whispered plans. Both knew the battle was far from over, and both felt the unspoken bond growing stronger, fragile yet unbreakable. They were no longer merely protector and protected, they were allies, partners in a fight that would test every ounce of courage, strength, and heart. Cliffhanger. At dawn, as the first light of day touched the fortress walls, a shadow fell over the city. The intruders were back, multiplied and more determined than before. And in their midst a figure emerged, taller, darker, and more menacing than any they had faced. The woman's mark flared, responding to the presence, and she whispered, her voice trembling, "This is only the beginning. And if we fail, all will be lost." The first light of dawn barely touched the fortress walls when the city outside erupted in movement. From the shadows the intruders advanced, more numerous than ever, their steps precise, their intent clear. Among them a taller figure moved with unnatural grace, a presence that seemed to drain warmth and light from the air. The woman with the mark shivered, the glow on her arm pulsing faster, a heartbeat racing in sync with her own. The HFY stood at the courtyard center, his dagger gleaming in the faint sunlight, eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. He had prepared for this moment, trained his guards, and fortified the walls, but this was unlike any battle he had faced. This was a reckoning of power, of destiny, of hearts intertwined with forces neither mortal nor fully understood. "Stay close," he commanded softly, his voice carrying both authority and care. "No one reaches you while I draw breath." She nodded, gripping his arm lightly. "I will try," she whispered, though she knew the mark demanded more than will. It demanded courage, trust, and surrender to its energy. The taller figure stepped forward, and a hush fell over the courtyard. The intruders stopped, sensing the authority of the HFY and the strange, growing power of the mark. Then, with a movement like flowing shadow, the figure raised a hand. A wave of cold air swept across the courtyard, making even the most steadfast guards shiver. The woman's mark flared, bright and strong, a living pulse of light and shadow, reacting to the threat. She took a deep breath, anchoring herself with the HFY's presence beside her. "Together," she whispered. He nodded. "Always together." And then the battle began, not with swords but with power. Shadows twisted and danced, clashing against the energy emanating from the woman's mark. The courtyard became a stage of light and darkness, the boundaries between reality and magic blurring. The intruders faltered, their confidence shaken by the force they could not control. The taller figure advanced, moving through the chaos with uncanny speed. The HFY met it head-on, dagger in hand, But even as he struck, he realized that force alone would not win this fight. The intruder's power was linked to the mark, and to defeat it, they needed more than steel. They needed unity, trust, and the bond that had quietly grown between them. "Listen to me," he shouted over the roar of energy. "Focus on me and on the mark. We are stronger together." The woman's eyes met his, and in that glance, everything became clear. The mark was not a weapon to control through fear. It responded to intention, to courage, to the connection between them. She lifted her hand, letting the energy flow freely, guided by her trust in him. The light from the mark surged, coiling around the intruders, holding them in place without harm. The taller figure faltered, anger and fear flashing across its features. "You cannot defy what has been written," it hissed, voice like ice. "But we can choose our own path," the Jefe replied, stepping forward, dagger at the ready but more as a symbol than a weapon. "This mark is not a curse. It is a choice, and we choose life, not fear." The woman's energy pulsed stronger, brighter, swirling with shadows and light until the intruders' movements became sluggish, their strength drained not by force but by the overwhelming power of unity. One by one, the intruders dropped to their knees, unable to advance against the bond between the Jefe and the woman. The taller figure stumbled, the mark's light reflecting in its red eyes. For the first time, hesitation flickered there. The Jefe stepped closer, unafraid. "It is over," he said, voice steady and calm. "Leave or be bound by your own fear." The figure froze, then slowly retreated into the shadows, followed by the remaining intruders. The courtyard fell silent, the energy of the mark gradually subsiding into a soft, steady glow. The woman sank to her knees, exhausted, and the Jefe caught her, lowering her gently to the ground. "You are safe," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They are gone. For now." She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes, a mixture of relief, fear, and gratitude. "I could not have done it without you," she whispered. I think I'm beginning to understand. You are stronger than you know," he said softly, "and braver than anyone I have met. The mark is part of you, but it does not define you. Your courage does." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the first real calm they had known in days. Outside, the city began to stir, unaware of the ancient forces that had just been at war in its heart. Inside the fortress, a different kind of peace settled, fragile but real. The woman finally rose to her feet, her hand brushing against his. "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said, letting a rare smile soften his features. "We rebuild. We prepare, we learn, and we remain together. Whatever comes, we face it as one." Her gaze softened, a smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like ages. "Together," she repeated, and this time it was not just a promise, it was a vow. Days passed, and the fortress became a place of quiet strength. The woman practiced controlling the mark, learning to harness its power without fear. The Jefe guided her, not with orders, but with patience, trust, and the steady presence that had become her anchor. Slowly, she grew stronger, more confident, and the bond between them deepened, a silent but powerful connection that neither words nor fear could break. They spoke little of their feelings, yet every glance, every touch, every shared moment carried unspoken truths. They were no longer merely protector and protected. They were partners, equals in courage and heart, bound together by destiny and choice. One evening, as the sun set behind the fortress walls, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the woman turned to the Jefe. "I feel free," she said softly, "not just from the mark, but from the fear, from the past, from everything that held me back." He studied her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "And I feel alive," he admitted quietly. "I have ruled through fear and shadow for years. But with you, I see what it means to protect, not dominate, to trust, not command, to love, not simply endure." Her gaze lingered on him, and for the first time the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. "I never thought I could feel this," she whispered, stepping closer. He reached for her, their hands brushing, and the mark on her arm pulsed softly as if in approval. "Nor I," he admitted. "But here we are, and I would face 1,000 shadows to keep you safe." They stood together, the fortress quiet around them, the city beyond waking to a new day. The mark, once a symbol of danger and fear, now glowed with a gentle light, a reflection of the bond they had forged, the trust they had built, and the courage that had carried them through. And as they looked out over the city, side by side, they knew the journey was far from over. Challenges would come, enemies would return, and the mark would call again. But they also knew this. Together they were stronger than any force that could threaten them. The HFY reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Whatever comes," he said, voice steady, "we face it together. Not as master and mark, but as equals. As partners, as something more." Her eyes met his, dark and glowing, filled with emotion. "Something more," she repeated, a smile touching her lips, a promise unspoken but deeply understood. The fortress, once a place of shadows and fear, now stood as a beacon of hope and strength. The city beyond, unaware of the battles that had raged in its heart, would never know the depth of courage and love that had been forged there. But within the walls, in the quiet moments between duty and destiny, two souls had found each other, healing, transforming and discovering the power of trust, connection and love. The sun rose higher, the fog lifted, and the first true light touched the city. The mark on her arm pulsed one last time in gentle rhythm, no longer a threat but a symbol of resilience, courage, and the bond that had saved them both. And as they stood together, side by side, the HFY realized something he had never known, that true power was not in fear or force but in love, trust, and the courage to face the unknown, together. Final cliffhanger closing note. Though the city slept unaware, a faint whisper lingered in the wind carried from the shadows. The mark has chosen, and the dawn has been won, but the story has only just begun. The HFY and the woman, united by destiny, stood together as guardians of both power and heart, ready to face whatever future the shadows would bring.